Hi, I'm Matt Shepard.
And I'm Chad Shepard.
And coming up on this edition of Shep, Shower, and Shave, we dive into an NFL offseason that is quickly picking up steam.
The Chargers' rookie head coach wants 2 veterans in camp instead of at a former teammate's Hall of Fame ceremony. Are problems already brewing in L.A.?
And early impressions from Lions training camp as well. Shep, Shower, and Shave brought to you by Fifth Avenue in Royal Oak, by Northwestern Tech, and by Nate Noth Designs. Follow his work on Instagram or on Facebook. I would just tell you this, early impressions from Lions camp. The thing that amazes me most so far is the size of their offensive line. I mean, they have gotten as big an offensive line as I can ever recall going into the season, and all these guys aren't going to make it, obviously, but Tony Hills decides to retire, and then earlier in the week, Storm Norton, the undrafted rookie out of Toledo, is kind of forced into the left tackle spot, and he's a big, big dude, but he's not nearly the biggest dude out there. There's some massive men along that offensive line. But the key isn't how big they are. It's whether or not they can move. They seem to be able to do both.
And you're talking about their size. We haven't even seen Greg Robinson or Cyrus Kouandjio out there. And Storm Norton is standing at 6'8" out on the left tackle side. When Taylor Decker is able to come back, he's at that same size. So you don't lose any collective height there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, obviously we've seen Robinson, we've seen some of the other guys, but we don't know fully what they're capable of, but we see their size, and we see how amazed that I am, at least, at the girth of some of these individuals and their ability to move. The other thing that has jumped out at me, a few things, Darren Fells, I mean, he's 6'7", 280-pound tight end, all right? Remember, this is a guy who played college basketball at UC Irvine, and now he's getting an opportunity. And Chad, I'm telling you right now, hands-wise, looks pretty good. Looks like he runs pretty good routes. Michael Roberts, the backup tight end, the kid they drafted out of Toledo, has looked pretty good. Now, there's been some times where he's dropped some passes. It's been a little loose with the football. And I noticed that earlier in the week. But overall, you can tell he knows how to get open. There are some things that I think, and it's practice, it's early, you can't take too much from training camp, you probably can't take too much from the preseason either, but there are some things that, at least from my standpoint, going into training camp, that I had some major questions about that I have been pleasantly surprised with so far. Kenny Golladay is another good example. Kenny Golladay is a big wide receiver. He was the Lions' third-round pick out of Northern Illinois. People thought they took him too early, and that may be proven true. But as a big target and a guy who knows how to get open and can use his body the right way, he's looked very comfortable early on. Matt Stafford has looked exceptionally sharp, but you would expect that. The thing about Stafford is going to be this. You're not going to be overly impressed. I mean, he made a throw earlier in the week. What was it? It was Monday, I believe. He made a throw Monday to Golden Tate in the corner of the end zone that was just unbelievable how perfect this was. He made another seam route throw to a tight end. It might have been Cole Wick that I thought was really impressive. It doesn't matter what he does in camp, and I don't think it matters what he does in the preseason. I mean, he's to the point now where he is judged strictly on the regular season. And, Chad, I would argue he's judged strictly on wins and losses. Is he going to help make this team a winning franchise? That is what most people will be judging him on. And I suppose you can't get away from that. So be it. But those are just some early impressions from Lions training camp. Hard to believe, but next week on Wednesday, they're headed to Indianapolis. They're going to be practicing there with the Colts like they did a year ago with the Pittsburgh Steelers as they get ready for preseason game number 1. It's come that quickly for this team and for the NFL in general.
And they're doing the same thing with New England, are they not, before their preseason
yeah, but
game with New England?
That's just going to be a walkthrough. They're not going to have joint practices. It's just going to be a walkthrough as they get ready for preseason game number 3. So Detroit has the Colts, then they're home to the Jets, they're home to the Patriots, and then they're on the road for the Buffalo Bills. That's their preseason schedule this year.
Speaking of early impressions, what do you think of the new uniforms now that you're actually seeing them in action instead of just on a dummy out there?
Yeah, they're okay. I mean, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I never liked the black tint as it was.
Yeah,
I didn't like
the same way. I didn't like the piping on the outside of the numbers or on the shoulders like that. I thought if silver and Honolulu blue are your colors, then own your colors. And I think that these new uniforms do that.
Personally, I would have loved had they gone back to the throwback uniforms,
Yeah,
but still
we'll never see it. We're never going to see it.
No, we're not. but still kept the line on the side of the helmet. I've got no problem with that, but I do like the way the old school uniforms pop at you. I've seen the new uniforms in person. Okay, I mean it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I want to see what Marvin Jones does in that uniform more than anything else. I want to see what a lot of these guys are doing, how they're playing, rather than what they look like more than anything else. I think it's really important how we look at Amir Abdullah. How is he performing out there? Theo Riddick, who's wearing the red jersey early in training camp because of the wrist surgery. How does he look? Is there anybody else who can take some reps in that offensive backfield, whether it be Zach Zenner or Dwayne Washington, whomever, who's going to jump out at you? Look, you and I both know this. Going into training camp, and there's a 53-man roster, you got a pretty good idea of at least 48 guys who are going to make this team. Glover Quinn's going to make this team. Darius Slay is going to make this team. Quandre Diggs is going to be battling, but I'm pretty sure he's going to make this team. There are really only about 5 spots that guys are vying for. And those 5 spots obviously come down to how well a lot of these guys play on special teams. I think you're going to have some decent players on the practice squad like you have in the past. I think it's telling that Cornelius Lucas hasn't taken a lot of reps at the left tackle spot because they know what he can do. And the storylines, I think, are plentiful for this Lions team. I'd like to know what you think and what interests you most throughout the preseason, because you look at the left tackle spot because of Taylor Decker's injury. You're going to look at the right side of the offensive line. How much better is Rick Wagner and TJ Lang going to make this team's ground attack more than anything else? How is this team going to improve from being ranked 30th in the NFL last year in rushing the football? How is Jared Davis going to handle the responsibilities of making the calls and basically being the defensive leader of that football team? Where is the depth from the defensive line going to come from, and who's going to start opposite Darius Slay at the other cornerback spot? Will Tease Tabor be there? Will be a Quandre Diggs? Will be DJ Hayden? Who knows who it's going to be? Nevin Lawson. But there's a good battle going on right there. Those are some of, and I think a lot of, the storylines that we're going to see for the Lions throughout training camp. And that's good. I think it's good for us in the media. It's good for us to talk about, but it's an interesting scenario that they're dealing with.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. You talk about the offensive line. Obviously, it's going to be reshaped a little bit. There's still opportunity for competition at a couple different spots, and it's going to be a different look than what we had in the past. But Jim Bob Cooter in particular has done a great job of structuring this offense to kind of cover up some of those deficiencies. So Matt Stafford takes a lot of shotgun, quick release throws, a lot of 3-step drops where he lets it sling. That also gets the ball into the hands of Detroit's best playmakers, which are Golden Tate, who's the best wide receiver in the NFL after making moves after the catch, breaking tackles after the catch, according to Pro Football Focus.
Yeah.
I mean, once he gets the ball in space, he's the best at breaking tackles in the league. That shouldn't be ignored. Marvin Jones had a fantastic first 4 weeks last year. That needs to be extended. Theo Riddick needs to stay healthy. Amir Abdullah needs to stay healthy. But this offense is still designed around its greatest weapon, which is Matt Stafford. What interests me is what's different from last year's approach. You talk about the talent can improve, but the approach can be the same. That's maybe a team like New England, although that's not the best example this year since they're trading LeGarrette Blount out for Danny Woodhead and a couple others. Or not Danny Woodhead, excuse me, but Rex Burkhead and a couple others. But to me, the tight end situation for the Lions is probably the most intriguing thing. Eric Ebron wasn't on the field yesterday. First day of camp, not a big deal. He'll be back out there. You talked about a little bit about Michael Roberts. You talked about the size of Darren Fells. This is a philosophically different team at the tight end position than where they were even a year ago, and it speaks to where they're trying to go in the future. Those offensive line shortcomings that we've kind of touched on and that have plagued this team for a long time, much like the bullpen and the Tiger situation, those can be covered up in part with more double tight sets, more Darren Fells on the field helping the run blocking on the edge, trying to set the edge in a better capacity than what our tackles are capable of doing. That's probably the most interesting thing to me from the offensive perspective, along with the emergence of Kenny Golladay at that number 3 wide receiver position. But on the defensive side of the ball, it's something that you also have already touched on, and that's competition in the secondary. We know Glover Quinn's the leader and the captain back there. We know Darius Slay has one of those sidelines locked down, and they play him in a lot of man coverage, if I'm correct, which means you want to play the same scheme across the board. I think that's something that Tease Tabor could excel at, but I haven't obviously been to camp or seen him well enough to have a good grasp on whether or not he'll be ready to do that from day one. if he is the guy who's outside, all of a sudden you have a quality competition inside at the corner spot. You have Nevin Lawson, you have DJ Hayden, who you acquired from Oakland, and you have a couple other guys in there, Jonathan Batamosi, or a few other players who are actually capable of creating competition at those roster spots instead of one guy basically being handed the job and telling everybody else, come on, please, somebody challenge him. Now you actually have guys who are going to have to earn every single rep that they get, and I think that's the best thing for the Lions. It's been the best collective change we've seen since Bob Quinn has come in here, and it's continued to emerge throughout the depth chart instead of just in a couple places.
I still think, for me anyway, and this has been, maybe it's just because of my obsession with the ability to run the football. I understand that in today's NFL that running backs are being, to a certain extent, phased out as the most important position. That's not the way it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was really important to be able to have guys like Billy Sims and Walter Payton and players like that. But you can't shake the fact that Detroit has been they have not ranked in the upper half of rushing the football, the upper half of being able to turn out some type of consistent ground game. I mean, if you're looking at being ranked 15th or higher, you can go all the way back for Detroit anyway, and their inability to get it done. It's still, you go all the way back to 2002, they're still ranked 29th. They've only been ranked in the top 20 once in the last 15 years. In the last 15 years, they've been ranked once in the top 20, and that was in 2013 when they ranked 17th. That's how disappointing. That's how bad this offensive line has been. That's how handicapped, I believe, any offensive coordinator or quarterback or passing game has been with this Detroit Lions. Think about that for a minute. 2013, they ranked 17th. That's the best they've ranked in the last 15 years. Everything else has been 20 or worse. Well, there was one where they were 19th, but tied for 19th. So 20 or worse over the last 15 years, 14 of those 15 seasons. So when I watch Rick Wagner and I watch TJ Lane, I want to see how much better they're going to help this running attack and how much better this running attack is going to be with a guy like Amir Abdullah or a Theo Riddick, if indeed they are healthy for an entire season. I think that's really important.
Yeah, we talk consistently about getting Matt Stafford the help that's required to have a balanced offensive attack and to remain a threat through the aerial game. And I don't think people really consider this all the time. You cannot just line up in shotgun and throw every single time as good as Matt Stafford's arm is. You don't want to throw 40 times a game or 50 times a game or whatever he's had to do in the past. That's not the preferred method of attack. And the better you can build up your offensive arsenal in these other places, the more susceptible the defense is going to be to that bigger threat in the long run. And that's something that the Lions have not been able to actively exploit in the past because their offensive line's so deficient. It's almost like their pass rushers can just pin their ears back and come at you snap after snap after snap because there's no fear of being beat on a big play on the ground. It just doesn't happen. And even, we've talked about the numbers, how many times he's had a 1,000-yard rusher, how many times the Lions have done this or reached that certain standard. How about just chunk plays in general? The Lions don't have those 20-yard chunk play rushes, those where you're not just struggling for a first down, you're struggling for changing field position from your 40 to their 40, where everything is flipped all of a sudden in a second. That hasn't happened enough. And I think Matt Stafford can, the argument is a little loose here, but supporting his own case almost by the way his teammates play better around him and create better opportunities for him, so he has to force less. And the reason I bring that up is because Pro Football Talk recently, actually on their show the other day, brought up this subject with Chris Sims, and Chris Sims said Matt Stafford, number 3 quarterback in the NFL, behind Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. That's the stature that he holds him in. I saw Dan Orlovsky chime in on Twitter and say he's certainly in the conversation, certainly involved in the conversation. And that sounds ridiculous when you hear it at first blush, right? But let's start to think about who you'd put there. Now, I'd probably put, health pending from last year, I'd probably put Ben Roethlisberger next, or maybe Drew Brees next.
Matt Ryan was the MVP
maybe Matt
last
Ryan,
year.
trying to remember what we thought of him as a year ago before he had the Super Bowl run and not just take that as everything.
Andrew Luck, many people would put there.
But after that, my point is the conversation the debate is a lot better and a lot closer than you think it would be off the bat. Matt Stafford, Drew Brees is not a ridiculous conversation. I'm not talking about career. I'm talking about who you want to win a game tomorrow. That's not a ridiculous conversation. Matt Stafford versus Phillip Rivers. Hell,
I'd actually tag Matt Stafford, okay? And I've said that for. Remember, 2 years ago, Cam Newton was the MVP.
I was just going to say, I'd take Matt Stafford over Cam Newton right now. And there are people in Indy who would probably switch out Andrew Luck for Matt Stafford. And I'm not saying that's the right move or that's
the minority.
That's what I would do right now. I'm just saying those voices exist somewhere. So if you're going to say, no, it's not Matt Stafford, I want to hear your strong, foolproof argument for Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, or Cam Newton, because those are the 6 guys that are brought up kind of in contention. Can you make cases for each of them? Absolutely. But my point is, it's not as ridiculous a conversation as we thought it was going to be at the outset.
Well, here's and you're right about all that, I believe. I'm not saying that I would put him third because I think Russell Wilson's a hell of a quarterback. But here's the thing that makes it really difficult to argue or difficult to compare. Russell Wilson, on a regular basis, has a very good running attack. Okay, Detroit had 9 rushing touchdowns last year. I want you to think about that. Yeah, and a historic defense. I was about to get to that. Cam Newton won the MVP 2 years ago, and rightfully so, took his team to the Super Bowl. I give him a ton of credit. He had a really good defensive team, too, okay? You look at what Ben Roethlisberger has done. Le'Veon Bell helps that cause. Don't kid yourself. I'm not taking anything away from Ben Roethlisberger. He's a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's been outstanding in his career. I like him. I like the fact that he wins. I like the fact that there's a never say die attitude with him too. But let's face it, historically he's had a pretty damn good defense and he's had a really good running game. Detroit has never had a top 15 running attack with Stafford under center. They've only had, I think, twice a defense that was worthy of consideration to be called one of the best. One of them, obviously, they were ranked second only to Seattle, and they ended up losing a playoff game, and they probably shouldn't have. But I want you to think about this. Last year, that team averaged 82 yards per game on the ground. Last year, that team averaged 3.7 yards per attempt. Their longest run from scrimmage was 42 yards. And that's tough to win that way. I'm not making an excuse for him. I don't think you are either. Let's just remind everybody that Joe Flacco is now considered a little bit of I don't want to say a bust, but I mean the contract that's associated with Joe Flacco, people think that he's overpaid, that he's a little bit overhyped. Joe Flacco's had some problems, yet he's won a championship. So I think when you look at certain guys like Drew Brees and you look at Cam Newton, when you get a team to a Super Bowl, or in Drew Brees' case, you win a Super Bowl, it's almost like there's no way you can have the conversation if a guy hasn't done the same. And I think we lose sight of history at some of the really good players who haven't won, and yet they're still considered one of the best of all time. Dan Marino, Fran McTarkenton, and the like.
That's fair, and it's interesting to hear what the narratives are for those players, because no one talks about Dan Marino's lack of run game or what kind of defense he had in Miami. It's just Dan Marino never made it back to the Super Bowl after his rookie year. And I wonder if those other complementary factors kind of just melt away over time, and that's kind of what it would be for Matt Stafford. If he doesn't ever win a playoff game, that's what people are going to say. They're not going to say, but They're going to say Matt Stafford never helped the Lions win a playoff game. And that is a bottom line that he understands. This is not news to him. This is not news to most of the fans that are following this organization or anything like that. So I don't think it's a controversial subject in that way. But in that sense, it's nice that it's simple. It's black and white. And it's if you get here, a lot of the negatives that have been thrown your way are less
accentuated.
Yeah, no, they're less meaningful than they were in the past. They're these barbs that people have been throwing at you. You take some of the wind out of their sail in that regard.
Yeah.
So for me, I hope he does get it done this year, for more reason than one, obviously. But the factors that you mentioned are exactly what he requires to take that next step, and for this organization to take that next step. I think they've done a good job of building towards it.
Yeah, I do too, but I don't know if this is the year or not, but I'll tell you this. When you look at certain things about what Stafford or any player has done, I think if they haven't reached the ultimate goal, and in this case it's not a lofty goal, it's winning a damn playoff game, for crying out loud. It is I think people are more apt to look and dwell on what you haven't done than what you have done. And that is last year, golden opportunity, win the division, beat Green Bay, got them at home, all this stuff, and can't get it done. That's really frustrating for a fan base, especially one that has been waiting as long as the Detroit Lions fan base. You brought up Phillip Rivers, and it's interesting because I want to dive into this next. Phillip Rivers wants to go watch. The Hall of Fame game is tonight. The Cowboys are taking on the Cardinals, okay, on this Thursday night. And we know the class of 2017. The 2017 class includes former Charger LaDainian Tomlinson. Bully for him. I think that's awesome. In addition to LaDainian Tomlinson, you've got Terrell Davis, running back, Denver Broncos, Jason Taylor, primarily of Miami and the Jets, Kenny Easley, who was one of the baddest asses at safety that you've ever seen, played at UCLA, then went home with the Seahawks, and former Spartan kicker Morton Anderson. Those guys are going into the Hall of Fame. Well, the Chargers, that's a big deal for LaDainian Tomlinson. It's a big deal for his teammates. Two of his best teammates he ever had, Phillip Rivers and Antonio Gates, they want to go watch the induction ceremony. There's controversy because their first year new head coach, Anthony Lynn, says, I want you at practice, not in Canton. Considering how close those three men were, it's been pretty standard procedure for teams to allow players a day off from training camp to head to Canton. How dangerous and murky of a line is Anthony Lynn walking here with two of his leaders? I think it's a dangerous one. Now, I've always been a big believer that the best coaches treat everybody the same. That you talk and you treat veterans like you do young players. I get that. So if you're expecting everybody else to be in camp, then why not expect Rivers and Gates? The difference here is that Rivers and Gates have always, and I stress always, underline it, bold it, highlight it, always been team players, always been good leaders, always been on time, always been in camp, always been in shape, always followed the rule. Why is it a big deal that you would let these two guys go celebrate a historic moment for a teammate? And by the way, Antonio Gates is considering that it doesn't matter what Anthony Lynn says, I'll take the fine. I'm going to watch him anyway.
And let's just provide a little bit of context to this. This has become public, and that's why I think it's a bigger deal than maybe it might be perceived to not be such a big deal internally, because there might be fruits of those conversations that Anthony Lynn has said that he had with Rivers, with Tomlinson, and with Gates that we're not fully aware of. But it certainly looks bad. The optics of it are not good. And Antonio Gates making a public comment like that, like, yeah, I might justify my coach and take the fine. That's not a good thing. That can't be a positive thing for the Chargers. They got enough problems with their new stadium, their new city, their terrible organization, and everything else that they got going on. To me, this is something that Anthony Lynn is a rookie head coach, okay? This is not Bruce Arians making this decision. This is not Bill Belichick making this decision. This is not a guy like Tom Coughlin, who is now down in Jacksonville, making this decision. This is a guy who's at his first stop. And it looks a little bit, whether or not this is true, it looks a little bit like a strong arm.
Yeah.
Like if you go, it'll be seen as me being walked over, when I don't think that's the case at all. Right. So I'm interested
He's going to relent,
at what his rationale would be, and I wonder why he wouldn't expand more on that rationale in when he did make comments to the media, because he basically just said, we're going to do what's best for the Chargers organization. This is what we believe is best for the team. To me, I don't know. That doesn't ring quite as I think it makes
the Chargers organization look bad, quite honestly.
Well, how about the fact that you had a rookie hold out for almost all of camp last year in Joey Bosa, and now you're going to make two guys that have been playing with this organization since 03 and 04 attend every second of every camp, especially on what is it, a Thursday? They'll be back for Friday, okay? They're just missing the one day.
Well, the Hall of Fame game is Thursday. The ceremony's Saturday, though.
Okay. Well, maybe they'll miss a day or two of camp, but like I said, at this point, if you're Anthony Lynn, you should be glad Phillip Rivers is willing to take a day off so that he doesn't get hurt, since your whole season is tanked.
Yeah, they don't want to go to the game. They don't want to go to Dallas, Arizona. They just want to go to the ceremony.
Right.
What's the big deal going to the ceremony? Rivers played, I think, 6 years with him. Gates played 7 seasons with him. Both of them were the trio, the foundation of what the Chargers did offensively. I think this makes you look bad. I think what the message to the team should be, look, we are a family here. We support one another. These guys are going to go support their teammate who they helped win X amount of games, X amount of playoff games, and did what they were supposed to do. The thing that the reason I'm letting them go is because of the admiration that these guys had for the work ethic that was the basis for what we're trying to get back to, so on and so forth. He can fill in the gaps however he wants to try to motivate his current team. I don't think there's a player out there that's going to look at this, a Joey Bosa in his second year, for example, and say, you know what? You let Phillip Rivers and Antonio Gates go have a day off Saturday. I want my day off next week. This is the Hall of Fame. It's not going back to watch NC State or Kent State play a big bowl game or a big regular season game. You're going to watch your teammate go into Canton in the Hall of Fame. This doesn't happen very often.
Look, and I don't know all the particular ins and outs of every part of an NFL practice and how this camp would work and how. Look, every rep is valuable. Every rep, it should be valued in that way, and I don't mean to suggest that they can just take a bunch off. But this is not the situation in San Diego like in Detroit. If Matt Stafford need to miss a day of training camp, you have second-year quarterback Jake Rudock there, and you have recent draft pick Bradley Kaya there. Perhaps there's something to having your veteran quarterback there where you're actually not able to run practice quite as well if he's not there to run things with the ones and to show guys how certain reps are taken. I get that. That's not necessarily the case in San Diego, okay, because they have Kellen Clemens, who's a longtime veteran who knows how to work an NFL locker room, and they just traded for Cardell Jones recently. So they have guys that they should be wanting to get reps, and Kellen Clemens should be able to lead the practice, so to speak. And the other thing is, this is not like Peyton Manning in Broncos camp asking if he can skip a couple days to go back and watch Edgerrin James or Marvin Harrison from his old team, his old organization going. Right. This is the same franchise. This is the Chargers franchise. If you're a Chargers fan,
he's one of the greatest Chargers of all time.
Since 1990 or 1995, these are the guys, maybe your top 3 Chargers of your entire lifetime.
That's a good point.
And now you have a rookie head coach trying to win over a divided fan base who says that he's bigger than these guys. I guess what he's really
it's the wrong battle to fight.
What he's really trying to say is that the organization is bigger than these guys, and no one player is bigger than the organization. And I get that, but that's not how it's going to be read from a public perception.
It's a great point. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, you got to pick your battles. It's just like being a parent, right? You got to pick your battles. This is the wrong battle, I think, for Anthony Lynn to fight. All right, one more thing before we say goodbye, and that is Jamal Adams. He's the rookie safety out of LSU, was drafted 6th overall by the Jets. Arguably, I think, the best player in the draft. He recently was in front of a fan forum with the New York Jets with, ironically enough, Commissioner Roger Goodell. And he said this when asked about CTE at this fan forum. He said that the football field would be the perfect place to die. His full quote, I'm going to read it for you. If I had a perfect place to die, I would die on the field. To me, this is a young man. Now remember, who was it? John Erskell, who retired because of the issues that he had with his head. There was was it a Boston University? I think it was a Boston University study. All but 100, but one of the 111 brains of former NFL players studied exhibited signs of CTE. Why? First of all, answering that way, obviously you didn't know Chuck Hughes. Answering that way was ill-advised on the part of Jamal Adams. Somebody should have stepped in and helped the young man, because it's probably the first time that he's been asked about this. To say that this is the perfect place to die, considering the amount of NFL athletes who have died because of CTE, whether taking their own life. You don't have to necessarily die on the football field. And I think it's also a situation where it's a young kid, it's a rookie who hasn't been through it yet and hasn't had to deal with it, doesn't have a family just yet. All those things where he's kind of out of his element right now, talking out of turn. And for Roger Goodell, by the way, in case people didn't see it, Roger Goodell stepped in and told the reporter, by the way, on average, our NFL players live longer than somebody like yourself, I think was ill-advised too. You just open yourself up for more criticism. The NFL has received a ton, and rightfully so, criticism for how they've handled former players who are dealing with injuries. They should have done a better job a long time ago, and I still think they should do a better job now. But in terms of educating their young players, if that's the answer to the question, the NFL has fallen down in that regard as well.
No, I think Roger Goodell is very serious about educating players and very serious about the way they present those comments publicly and the way they depict that education and enact that education. Its effectiveness can absolutely be debated, but I think the NFL has started to put more money, not enough, but started to put more money, time, effort into those kinds of things. Because every time somebody like Jamal Adams opens his mouth, he makes the league look bad, and
right.
Roger Goodell had to do cleanup. I did not see the full exchange. I'd like to see video of the full exchange to see the context, and so I don't know where that Goodell comment came in. I don't think that Jamal Adams said what he said, and then Goodell cut right in, and I know you're not asserting that, cut right in and said, by the way, our players live long. I think it was a separate exchange, a separate conversation, so maybe I'm wrong about that. But Jamal Adams is 20 years old. And that's what I'm trying to remember first and foremost. Yeah. Because we can say whatever we want. We do a terrible, terrible job preparing people that we know are capable of playing professional sports to be citizens of this country and of the cities that they're playing in. We do an awful job, in my opinion.
And you say we. Who's we?
Well, as a collective society, but particularly a lot of the universities from where these kids come from. I'm not trying to comment on the character or integrity of Jamal Adams because I don't know him as an individual. But I do know that he is not properly educated on concussions or CTE or how it works.
And that's troubling to me.
And he shouldn't have his mouth open about a subject that he's not as well educated about. We have a tendency in this country to be unwilling to admit when we're wrong or unwilling to admit when we are underinformed on a subject. Yeah. We're afraid to say, I don't know. This was a silly thing for Jamal Adams to say, and I'm trying to chalk it up as something that a 20-year-old would say. You speak hyperbolically all the time when you're of that age, if that's even a word.
Yeah, there's
people
all
say all the time.
Yeah.
Well, in a bar fight, I'm going to kill you. People break up with their girlfriends and tell them they're going to kill each other. And stuff like that.
Let's bring it closer to just football. They're asking Jamal Adams after practice about certain things. I'm sure there's a ton of cliches that he's used. Still learning, still just getting in the playbook, all those generic stuff. Why can't you be just as generic when you answer a question like that? I try not to think about it. I'm just getting my career started. I need to educate myself a little bit more on it, but I don't think about it right now because if that's all you're going to think about, you're not going to be able to do your job very well. Next question.
I just wonder, and that's where I wish I could see the full exchange. What was the question that was posed to him? Or he was just talking about CTE in general, and he went on this
somebody asked
tirade on his own and kind of went down that route on his own. And look, what he's trying to express is passion. He cares about this.
Yeah,
he's invested
that's
in
good.
the game. I understand that. But first of all, there's not a person alive who should be willing to die for the game of football.
Right.
Okay?
Agreed.
It's not more important than any single one of us.
Agreed.
And the fact that you are willing to die for the game of football is a troubling sign to me that you're going to be one of those guys who is either broke or without you don't know what to do with your time when the game is over. There is so much more to life. And it looks to me that Jamal Adams has gotten to this point in his life without figuring out what any of those other things are. And that's a bigger problem for the NFL because their greatest representatives are their players.
Exactly.
When their players are broke or putting bullets in their head or trying to figure out what the hell else they want to do with their life after their career is over, that's not good. There's only so many room for guys in the booth. There's only so much room for guys in front office. Ultimately, you're still perpetuating the machine that got you to this stage of unhappiness. You're helping somebody else reach that stage of unhappiness because there might not be a solution for them when you get there. How about you get your life together, figure out some passions, figure out some truth in the world, and take things from there? Or how about you go to an event where you can hear from the wives of NFL players who've taken their own lives,
right.
The kids of NFL players who've taken their own lives, people whose complete ability to function is diminished entirely before you wake up and say, before you open your mouth and say something stupid like that. So
Go talk with Junior Seau's family. Go talk with Dave Duerson's family.
Yeah.
Go talk to Chris Borland a little bit, and Chris Borland, who retired early because of CTE. And I'm not saying this to scare you, or nor should you get into it and immediately be on guard. I'm just saying we need to be educated. Too many times we just sit there and go, you know what? I'm going to let it go because eventually it'll go away. This ain't going away. And you're right. The representatives for the NFL are its players. And when you come out and you say something as ignorant, I don't want to call it stupid. You're right. You put a good way. He's passionate about his sport. He's trying to impress his new fan base. He wants people to go out and say, that's my guy, all that stuff. I'm not saying he's disingenuous, but he's obviously not very knowledgeable, nor is he educated on what's going on in the NFL or football in general. And that surprises me a little bit because the NFL prides itself on preparing its players for more than just game days and practice days. It's supposed to be beyond football life. And obviously, either he wasn't there at that seminar, he didn't take copious notes, or the NFL is failing in its job.
Well, the other thing I think about this is the clear miseducation on the part of Jamal Adams of what CTE is.
Right.
You're not going to die on the field from CTE. You're going to die on the field from a fractured spine or a fractured skull or a bone or a joint
that's
otherwise
slow death,
that's
CTE.
twisted in a terrible way. CTE affects your quality of life and the quality of life for everyone around you, the people that you love. And it affects you at a very long pace over a long period of time if you're capable of making it through that. And it's a terrible, terrible thing to have happen. So it doesn't even look like he properly knows what CTE is in the first place, which means that seminar that you talked about, yeah, he certainly was either asleep or not paying attention during that. Or maybe the NFL is... I gave him too much credit earlier, and it's more of a dog and pony show where they're saying, yes, we can check the box, educated players today.
Right.
When in reality, you don't, there are these events. I'm not going to assert how seriously they take it because obviously they're putting some kind of money into it. But these events are usually not a one-off thing. It's usually not, hey, show up tomorrow, 10 a.m. If you roll in around 10:30, that's okay. We're going to do a 90-minute symposium on concussions. Then you go get your lift in and go home. They are doing CTE concussion education right after they heard from their agents, right after they heard from their athletic trainers who gave them a briefing on how this works, right after they heard from the PR staff, right after they heard from, they're doing one after another, after another, after another. Anyone who's been to school in their life understands that your brain drains over time. And my point in all this is, what is the NFL even doing to ensure that the state of mind for the players when they receive this message is one where they can actually intake the information?
Right.
Because if you're just checking a box that you attended, it's an attendance grade, that is bogus.
I would tell you this, as troubling as his comment was, and uneducated as his comment was, and disturbing as Roger Goodell's follow-up was, I am just as disturbed, if not more, at the reaction after Jamal Adams said what he said. The response was met with an ovation from the fan base that was there to ask questions. They clapped. Actually, they clapped. They cheered as he said, the field is a good place to die. It's not just the players that aren't getting it, Chad. It's obviously the fans of football who aren't getting it either.
So they need to be just as more importantly educated because right now they are blind and deaf and just...
They don't care.
They're clapping at a clown that's making a movement instead of understanding what they're clapping for. And unfortunately, that's what a large percentage, in my opinion, of our country's fan bases have become.
Chad, it's gladiator is what it is. Are you not entertained? All they're there is to watch football. They don't care what happens to the guy who wears the helmet. They just care what happens on the field on Sunday. Shep, Shower, and Shave brought to you by Fifth Avenue, always a premier destination in Royal Oak with over 36 beers on tap, great food, drink specials, a kitchen that is open until 2 a.m., and over 40 HD TVs to go watch the Tigers, Red Wings, Lions, Pistons, U of M, or MSU. Brought to you by Nate Noth Designs. Find his work on Instagram or on Facebook. He designed the Shep, Shower, and Shave logo. And brought to you by Northwestern Tech. HVAC is all they teach, so they've perfected their hands-on program for the last 38 years. Get trained, certified, and into the field in only 10 and a half months. It's the HVAC school that works. Call Northwestern Tech at 248-358-4006.